San Francisco's International Hotel, the I Hotel, 40 years after an eviction that was reported around the world. Why many believe it's as important to the Asian American movement as a Stonewall bar is to the LGBTQ community. That's next on Emil Bio's Takeout. And hello, dear listener, and welcome to what I call Emil Bio's Takeout. We serve it, you take it out. Forms the acronym EAT, E-A-T, and it is time to eat. My takes on all things about race, society, politics, and diversity, and everything those things touch in our culture and society with respect to Asian Americans. And you don't have to be Asian American to lend us your ears. It's your minds we want. Hey, I'm Emil Guillermo, your host, and you might say, why amuck? Well, the short story is that for nearly 15 years, my Emil Amok column was a staple of Asian Week, what was once the leading Asian American weekly in English in America. Amok was the name of my compilation of essays, and Amok is on my driver's license, not indicative of my mental state. Why am I whispering? It's just me and you here. By the way, it's also the name of my solo show, which I'm doing again. Be on the lookout for Amok, the Amok monologues. And now this column that I write is home based on the website of the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund blog. That's at ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. Check it out. And if you like what you see and hear, ALDEF is a 501c3. Go to the donate button. It's tax deductible. Really. And it's a good way to get a tax cut. Not like the draconian Trump way. A really good way. So check it out, aaldef.org/blog. Now, on this episode, The I Hotel, I talked to the director of the documentary, The Fall of the I Hotel, Curtis Choy, and we'll have that in a moment. But first, if you don't know the I Hotel history, well, you should. It's an important piece of Asian American history coming after the strike at San Francisco State that produced Asian American ethnic studies, among others. Ethnic studies in general, but Asian American studies, it all started there at San Francisco State. And it was right there in the city where the first Filipinos from the 20s were holding out in a single resident occupancy or SRO hotel known as the I Hotel, the International Hotel. It was on Kearney Street, what was once San Francisco's Manilatown. Kearney right there at the edge of Portsmouth Square, the edge of Chinatown. And it had been about 10 blocks or so. Now it was down to 1 block in the 70s. And the relevance today is that 40 years later, we have the same sense of poor people being squeezed out of the city, just as we did 40 years ago, August 4th, 1977, when the I Hotel residents were evicted once the building was taken over by a developer who wanted the tenants out. Now, I speak as a San Franciscan in exile who looks from afar and sees a city that's changing beyond recognition. I'm proud to be called a native and, a native son born and raised in San Francisco. But I just shake my head when I see what's going on now as people struggle to stay in the city with the housing prices so high. And I'm wondering if this 40th anniversary isn't an opportunity to maybe relearn some lessons that must be relearned, lessons that were first forged in 1977. Because if we don't learn the lesson, then we are indeed no better off than we were way back then. People are being forced out now. And it's not just Filipinos. It's people who find themselves in that 99% who can't afford the exorbitant prices to live in San Francisco. That's one aspect of the International Hotel story. But the other one is that, the International Hotel has this role in Filipino-American history. 40 years after the I Hotel, and as a native San Franciscan, I look at the city as an outsider looking in. And I know my father. My father came to the city direct from the Philippines, an American national, a colonized Filipino. He was undocumented, but he didn't need papers. He was a colonized Filipino. It was 1928. And for many people who needed a place to stay, it was places like the I Hotel that gave these men, they were mostly men, It was men to women 10 to 1, 10, 15 to 1. It was SRO hotels like the I Hotel that gave people like my father a home in the city. Either that or you took a taxi to take you into Stockton where you learned to pick in the fields for $1 a day. My father told me he didn't want to go to Stockton. It was too hot. He wanted to stay in the city. But his luck really came not in the 20s or the 30s or the 40s or the 50s. It came late in the 50s, actually, when he met my mother and he started a family. That's how long it took for a lot of these men in the 20s to come and start families. That was a function of the anti-miscegenation laws that existed that few people really understand that it extends way back. I mean, they might have heard of the Loving decision that lifted all anti-miscegenation bans or bans against intermarriage, or they may have heard about the bans against gay marriage, right, that were lifted only recently. But these laws against marriage or intermarriage between Filipinos and everyone else, I mean, they were in the books from the 30s on. And it's one of the reasons why there was this delay to start a family until after the war. And so, I look at the I Hotel story, and I know if I were looking at it through my father's eyes, I would see his buddies. I would see his friends. I would see the unfortunate men who came in the 20s who were not able to marry and start their own families. Because I know that my father, because he did have a family, we had our own I Hotel. We were renting rooms, spare rooms in our flat, wherever we lived, either in the Mission or in the Richmond district or in the Fillmore district. Our extra room always went to a single Filipino male. Now, I know we had at least 3 or 4 who rented out our spare front room for those who didn't have family, or for those who weren't even lucky enough to have the I Hotel as a refuge. So to me, the whole idea of this 40th anniversary of the eviction of the I Hotel, of course, the eviction is part of it, remembering the eviction, but just remembering the hotel as a symbol and what it represents to the people that represent the so-called Manong generation, Manong, which is a term of respect for older Filipino male. Manang for the women. Weren't as many Manangs because, as I said, the male to female ratio was 10 or 15 to 1 because the Filipinos are brought over as a workforce. And no one was interested in having the Filipinos start families. And so they were just bachelors wandering around. And the I Hotel was just another stop. So I look at the anniversary of the I Hotel, the 40th year anniversary, as a personal one, because I know that it really is part of my father's story, part of my father's friend's story, and it certainly represents their experience in America. Fortunately, there's a happy ending somewhat. The corporate developers failed to complete their project and ultimately gave in and allowed it to become a nonprofit HUD development with community affordable housing advocates and the Catholic Church really taking them. I guess the Catholic Church was the biggest proponent or the pusher of the project we see now. But what do we have now? We don't have Manilatown with the I Hotel as anchor. That's not there anymore. But we do have a big housing project, and we have a Catholic education center, and we have a small corner that the Filipinos can call their own, a community center. Not exactly an anchor. It's a stretch to call it a cornerstone, but it literally is a corner. and something the community from here on can build on, or at least those who can stay close to San Francisco or still call San Francisco home can use as a resource. I know that every time I come back into the city, I see Manilatown there at the I Hotel still as a kind of refuge for me, even though it's not exactly the kind of refuge that was there for my father and his buddies from the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s. So on Friday, August 4th, I'll be hosting a panel discussion at the hotel, and it'll include, among other people, Curtis Choy, the documentary filmmaker. I talked to Curtis about his film, The Fall of the I Hotel, the night of the eviction, and what happened. Here are the thoughts of documentary director Curtis Choy.
I mean, we were all on the coattails of the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement. And so we just kept finding injustices everywhere. And, here were these old-timers, and then you find out that they came here to work as laborers and seamen and whatnot. And now they were being screwed over by the man. So naturally, all of us young people were outraged by that and wanted to do something about it.
And you thought film was your way of telling the story.
Yeah. I mean, I was a budding filmmaker, and this was a very compelling story.
What were the other people's reaction? I mean, there was a movement that formed and that took shape, but these guys had been there a long time. They arrived in the 20s and the 30s, and here it was in the 70s. Did it strike you as odd that it was still, so relatively unknown even in the 70s?
Unknown to whom?
Unknown to the general public. Unknown to.
Well, I mean, the history of colored people in this country has largely been, held as unimportant, right? And except in terms of how those colored people could be exploited. Otherwise, we're not really part of the cultural landscape. And so this again, with ethnic studies, this was part of our own awakening.
Yeah.
When nobody else had written the history and stuff, and we figured, well, we have to do it.
Right.
Otherwise, it'll be another white professor.
Did you
or nobody?
Or nobody, yeah. Did you graduate from San Francisco State as an ethnic studies major?
No. I got a BA in film.
But you were there were you there around the time of the strike or just after the strike, I guess?
I arrived just after.
Mm-hmm.
So I was, the first generation to experience ethnic studies.
Yeah. And
ethnic studies was taught by students. They're not the entrenched people that are there now.
Right.
But way back then, it was quite revolutionary.
What was it like? I mean, so students who didn't have their MAs or or were they others?
Well, I think a lot of them were MA or MA tracked.
Yeah.
I mean, they were the leaders. They were the ones who and there were a couple of instructors who were older.
Right.
But it was largely a very young department.
Mm-hmm. So, all right. So you make the trailer film, and tell me about the anniversary, because when you were there on August 4th, where were you positioned, and what were you seeing live? As a person.
I mean, where was I physically?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was outside. I was on 2 phone trees, and the phone trees were supposed to alert all of the activists to show up when eviction was going down, so that we could defend the hotel. And I never got a call. Mm-hmm. and I had an office out in the Richmond district, and I would commute home to Berkeley every night, and it had become my habit to go around the I Hotel block and sniff the air. I had a 16 millimeter Bolex that I carried on the back of my motorcycle, and I would cruise around the block every day on my way home. And this one night, I believe it was a Thursday, it felt different. There was something up. So I parked, got off, and wound up talking to people, and the rumors of the eviction had gotten stronger. So I decided to just hang around and not go home. And then as things progressed, my partner, Chris Chow, was in Los Angeles working for KCET. And so I called him up and said, look, I think it's going down tonight. So I only have 2 rolls of film, so bring some film. And so he flew up from L.A. and brought film. And I had to make this decision about whether or not to stay inside or outside. I really wanted to be inside because that's where the people were. And that was a perspective I knew that Pig Media would never have. You know, I wanted to represent our side. Because, you know, on TV, all you ever see is the mayor and the police. You know, they never talk to us.
Right.
So I decided that the most useful footage could be gathered if I stayed outside. And the other thing is, if you're inside, we don't know how violent the cops would be. And I was afraid that my footage might have been confiscated. And then it would have been all for nothing.
Yeah, so you decided to go outside.
Yeah.
But now have you ever, I'm sure you've thought about, well, if I stayed inside, I could have gotten some things that no one else would have seen.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. But for the purposes of my own film, what if I couldn't gather up footage later? Right. I mean, a completely interior view of the event wouldn't really help you explain the event.
Yeah.
So I decided that staying outside was probably my best option.
Yeah. I guess you could have gotten some shots inside before the event, and
yeah, but there was no way to tell how it would unroll.
Yeah.
So I mean, you could get trapped.
Yeah. Did you?
And the attendants were like piling mattresses up and stuff like that. So,
Mm-hmm.
You know, that would have kept you from egress also.
Yeah. Did you? Well, did they go in though? Did the police go in to take the men out, or did they make the men come out on their own volition?
They forcibly removed them.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, the cops came on horseback in order to dislodge the barricade,
Mm-hmm.
the human barricade, and the fire department supplied an aerial ladder truck, and some cops went up it to attack by way of the roof. There were some cops on the fire escape on the outside, and all of the community groups on the ground floor were their doors were sledgehammered. So the cops, you know, actually broke in, and then they didn't. There were a handful of demonstrators that got dragged out,
Mm-hmm.
but the old men were basically they had community folks with them, younger people who helped to walk them out of the building. So the cops did not physically attack the old men.
And you were with other photographers, other people outside, or where
No.
were you?
No, I was floating.
Yeah.
I stayed on foot.
And
There was a couple of, well, there was at least one truck that had media crowded onto it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I stood on that truck for a short period of time and got a couple of shots, and then again, you know, it was another trap. So I got off of it and sought other angles to shoot.
So you had your Bolex and you had 3 rolls of film?
I actually had something like 4 rolls of film.
So four rolls, and if I recall, the Bolex takes like a 3 or 4 minute clip per roll, right?
No, it's 2 minutes and 45 seconds.
Okay, I gave you a little more time. So, yeah, I mean, I remember shooting the Bolex. Was it the 16S?
It was the 16. This is the very first model, reflex. So it had the tiniest possible viewfinder in it.
Oh, because I remember.
But it was a reflex camera.
Yeah, I remember in my film class, we were able to shoot with. It was an upgrade to go to the 16S after the Canon 70DR, but
Oh yeah.
I knew you only had about less than 3 minutes. I was thinking maybe that your Bolex had a little more capacity, but those. Once the film runs out, there you go. So you had to be pretty selective. There must be
Absolutely.
There must be a lot of things that you saw that you didn't capture, right?
Well,
I mean, you got everything good, presumably, but there must have been some things that if you...
Oh, sure. There was plenty I didn't capture.
Yeah.
I
mean, if it was a video camera of today, I mean, you'd be rolling all the time.
Right, you would just let it run.
Yeah.
Yeah, back then you couldn't let it run. Plus, it only ran 16 feet before you had to wind it up again.
Right. So
which was kind of, it made you think about the shots you were getting. So every shot had to count.
So your selectivity as you were filming, I mean, you had to be you were like always conscious that you were going to run out or you might miss something, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And I gather what do you think is the top images that you got? Which ones were unique to your position and your viewpoint that no one else captured?
Oh, that's interesting. I've never thought of it that way. I've always thought of the event as a totality, so I've never broken it down to this is my favorite shot.
Mm-hmm. Or the one that lingers that you remember, you say that's the shot of the movie. That's the one that I'm going to isolate because it captures.
Oh well, some of that is not. It's not particularly conscious.
Mm-hmm.
You're just feeling for it the whole time. I think that when Emil de Guzman was dragged out, I think that of all the shots, that's probably a self-contained emblematic shot. Because earlier in the film, he says the police are just going to have to drag us out, and there he is being dragged out on his back. In some respects, that shot also represents the actual defeat of the pro-people forces.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the word defeat, and we're honoring the 40th anniversary, but it is an eviction, and it was a loss, and yet there was something. There was a kind of there was a victory of sorts just to stand up to that, but ultimately it turned out to be a defeat.
Yeah.
So,
well, the victory is actually that enough people persevered that decades later they built a new hotel. Mm-hmm. And in the interim, no greedy corporate asshole was allowed to build a parking lot. That is actually a win.
Yeah. But how about at the time when as you described, Emil de Guzman being dragged away, it was a defeat. How were people? As a filmmaker, how were you? What were you feeling that? Because you didn't know that this was going to happen. That ultimately they would build a new iHotel, and that the corporate folks would lose.
Yeah, it was talked for decades. So yeah, I was as skeptical as anybody.
Yeah. I mean, how did you deal with really the reality of this defeat? Right after. I mean, it must have been, in a way, was it demoralizing? Was it? Did it fuel your motivation to do the film, to make sure that people?
Well, I would say that there was a collective depression that I think many people didn't wake up from for years.
A collective depression.
Because we had just spent a 10-year struggle to keep people in their homes, and there were a lot of court defeats along the way, but still we were there. The community centers were there. The men were still living in their rooms, and so I think we had kind of, I don't want to say become complacent, but we were confident that we would continue to prevail. Mm-hmm. So it was sort of well, it's sort of like all the Hillary people going berserk because Trump won. It's like, no way that could have happened, and yet it did.
You said collective depression?
Yeah.
How deep was it, in fact? I mean, for those of us who, I guess when I saw you with the premiere of the film in '83, that was 6 years. Just describe how that affected other forms of activism, say for these same tenants, or for issues around Chinatown and other Asian Americans.
I can't really address that because I was involved with my career and with the film, and so I kind of I didn't go to whatever those housing meetings were and all that kind of stuff, but just my feel for the pulse of when I ran into people, mm-hmm. The kind of sense of optimism that we used to feel, that things were moving forward, that things were going to improve, that, the wind was out of those sails. It was gone. And the fact that, like, Kearney Street Workshop, mm-hmm. Hasn't been on Kearney Street since. And, it kept moving around and was still called Kearney Street, but we lost a lot. It wasn't just the hotel, but that the block itself represented a certain period of time and culture that we don't have anymore.
Yeah. So now we're at the 40th, and on subsequent viewings of your film, and after seeing the time, how have the time that's passed, and what has transpired? What are your thoughts now as we approach the 40th anniversary? More positive, I guess, somewhat.
I don't have a real opinion because I moved away. Mm-hmm. It doesn't affect me really. It's just it's in my memory for sure. But I miss going to all those little restaurants we used to go to mm-hmm. in China. Everything has changed there. Nothing is as it was. If you had a favorite restaurant, it ain't there anymore.
You're talking about San Francisco in general, right?
Well, I'm talking about Chinatown.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, we're at the I Hotel block.
Right.
I used to go to the Silver Wing Cafe across the street from the I Hotel. And I mean, all those people were pretty old then. They were, in their late 60s, 70s. So, I mean, they wouldn't be around now anyway. But it's like we just have these terrific memories of hanging out and always bumping into your friends along the way because they were everywhere. I certainly miss that.
After 40 years, what are the key the key thoughts you have about as we approach the anniversary? I mean, are you happy that to be part of this and that we have this new building but it seems like the Filipinos have just not quite a full third, but the little center, the housing is still there, but much more massive compared to the community center.
But that romantic sense of community, I think, it's not there anymore. Mm-hmm. That you feel viscerally when you're there. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're walking into like the gallery space. Oh, this is nice, and that's good. They preserve this stuff, but it's not the same as walking into the iHotel on Sunday when they're having a brunch. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And you go into the iHotel and there's a counter there now. I don't know that there's necessarily a security person sitting there, but at the old iHotel, you simply walked in and roamed the hall looking for whoever you're looking for. You go into the elevator and you need some kind of weird pass card thing or whatever to use the elevator. I mean, it's all become this kind of this modern, I don't know. For me, the whole aesthetic is just kind of off-putting because it's so dehumanized.
Not the same.
No. But as far as I'm glad that a bunch of us are still around, that we can remember the event. I'm happy to be showing the film print, which hasn't been seen it showed at the Yerba Buena Center last year, but that was like the first time in like decades. The film print looks different. So that's I'm kind of anxious to see it. You can probably see more detail in the eviction scenes. And it's also like the old version, so you don't see the new iHotel in it. It ends in 1983. I mean, the fact that it actually took 6 years to produce was, not lost on me.
Yeah.
It took a long time.
Well,
and I was really driven to finish it because we'd promised all these old guys that we were making a movie about them. And I sure as hell wanted them to see it before they kicked off.
Yeah.
And that's it. And like the iHotel itself, that was largely a failure, because they did die. And only a handful of people got to move into the new iHotel because so much time had elapsed.
So, but this remains your legacy now, right? I mean, this film, this event, and you document the event. So that has to be a bit gratifying 40 years after.
It's been gratifying all the way along. I'm glad I was able to contribute something useful. I'm in my commercial career. I just did feature films and PBS docs and stuff like that, but nothing that I had like a prideful hand in. This thing, I did most of the physical work. So unlike a lot of, they talk about film as a collaborative art. Well, it's different when an artist actually makes something and actually physically molds most of it, and that's pretty much what I did.
So you cut it, you did the sound and everything.
Yeah. I had other people help. You look at the credits, there are plenty of people. Like, I couldn't cut the negative.
Yeah.
You get a specialist to do that. I couldn't do the optical effect. We can do that now, with Final Cut and whatnot, but back then you couldn't. That was all lab work.
Right. I remember, I worked at KQED as a kid intern, and I got to meet the filmmakers there. Do you ever know Mallory Slate? Remember Mallory?
No.
Oh,
No.
they were all the NABET shooters who shot film. They were shooting the CP-16s.
Did you know Alan Willis?
I knew Alan. Yeah, I knew Alan.
Yeah, he was cool.
Alan
and Emil Bio was there.
Yeah. Oh, Blair Stapp. Remember Blair Stapp?
Yeah, I remember Blair.
Blair and guys like non-shooters like Haig Mackey and Charlie Moran. All those guys from KQED. I was just a high school kid, and I got to meet all these guys and hang out at Al's Trans Bay Tavern, where we used to hang out. And so that was all like pre-77, because I knew them around 72, 73. And then I went away and went to school, and I remember I know Chris Chow pretty well, just from my days at 4. He was at 5, and
first hired and first fired.
Yeah, Chris and I have traded notes over the years, but I will say this about your film. I mean, it's the the TV stations, they all had their cameras rolling, but the piece or the film that stays, or that I think is is really the legacy of the event, is your film. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, I think it is. Thank you. All the TV stations the night of the eviction ran the footage of the guy in the striped shirt with blood going down his face. Mm-hmm. That's what they ran.
Yeah.
They left all the good stuff on. They didn't show it.
Yeah. Well, when they do a 30-second VOSOD or something like that, or you don't do a full package. I do remember seeing. I was on the East Coast. And I remember seeing Hungisto on his white horse. I think it was a white horse.
Not eviction night. He was on foot.
Was he on foot?
Yeah.
Well, just the other...
Escorted by a really huge deputy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But there are other horses, right? There are horses...
The horses were like... they weren't tax squad. They were the SF police.
Yeah.
And the ones I remember were brown.
Brown, okay. So maybe I just sort of mythologized it and made it a white horse and put Hungisto on it. But I don't think I just remember a clip on the network news, because, as I said, I was on the East Coast, and then when I got back to the city, there it was, just a hole in the ground. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, when I came back throughout the years. So what are we going to do on Friday, Curtis? Are you going to be, I don't know, is it, when we actually get to the day, is it something you get choked up about, or you're just more realistic about now, and actually a little more optimistic because there was a victory of sorts in the end?
I don't know, man. I've always taken my life a day at a time, so it's kind of hard to predict how I'm going to feel.
Yeah.
It would be nice to see people I know.
Yeah.
And now that I've left the area, it's like always shocking to see people change, right?
Yeah. Do you ever think back and say, I know you were saying that it seemed like you were always going to win because you had won, or the activists had won little battles, or they're still there. But do you ever play, I guess not exactly Monday morning quarterback, but a version of that where you say, well, maybe we could have done this, or maybe we could have...
Well, I've always felt that it may have been a mistake to release the human barricade. That was a decision made by the elderly tenants, because they didn't want those people to get hurt. Some did anyway, but the reason the barricade was told to go across the street was was the older people didn't want to see bloodshed. Now, if people that did the barricade were committed keeping the cops out. So if they hadn't been dispersed by the tenants themselves, who knows what would have happened? Would the police have backed down? I like to think they would.
That they would have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back down. And that people would not have been evicted.
And so, if that barricade had stayed, maybe that could have been that would have given you the moral high ground that you needed.
No, it would have kept the cops out. I don't know about a moral high ground.
Yeah.
But the fact is, we physically gave up the building by releasing the barricade. So, if we're speculating, I'm going, well, what if they hadn't dispersed? The cops knew that media was there. So, is this going to be like tanks in Hungary? I don't know.
But that would have been like the guy standing up to the tank at Tiananmen Square, right?
No, it's more like tanks rolling over masses of people.
Oh yeah. Well, if they
and I don't think the city would have done that because it was just the PR is just too horrible. So what if the barricade had held for another 20 minutes? Would the cops then decide that it was just the PR would be just too bad, and so they weren't going to go on with it?
Or they'd come back on another night.
Oh, sure. But that's a tactic, right?
Right. And it still would have been at least a temporary victory, right?
Yeah.
Another day.
Oh, yeah, it would have been a big boost for our side.
Yeah.
Yeah, we made the cops back down.
Well, this is a speculation worthy of a 40th anniversary, right? We shall see. If they were going to time capsule it up and say, well, or if they were to put it in a textbook in 2 paragraphs, or more likely 1 paragraph, what would they say? And this is what you'd impart to the next generation of folks, Asian American or not.
Well, the whole thing is evolving, and I think things have become more untenable than ever. The way gentrification has made everything in the city unaffordable. There's here in Portland, homelessness is a huge problem. And I saw that in San Francisco a long time ago, and that's still growing. And you can't trust the count that the city makes, right?
Right.
And I think that the future is going to be one of scarce drinking water, no gasoline, and I feel sorry for young people. I'm actually, I'm kind of glad I'm old, and I'm not going to last long enough to see this horror come upon us. But as young people are going to have to live through it. So I kind of feel sorry for them.
So
real uplifting, isn't it?
Yeah. So a lesson from the iHotel is the future is some kind of Mad Max scenario, huh?
Well, I don't know. It certainly is. The increased distance between the filthy rich and the poor working middle class. It's kind of our numbers are dropping, right?
Yeah.
we don't really have middle class anything anymore. It's just sort of, they're drifting apart.
Yeah. Well, it's becoming a lot more like the Philippines, that's for sure. You know, where you have your oligarchs and your rich, and that thing that used to be...
Yeah, well, you can argue that California is moving that way.
Yeah.
That all of the middle class people are fleeing to Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and you're left with the worker class and the obscenely filthy rich.
Well, that's what San Francisco is becoming. That's like, you know, when my father came, my father was in that group in the 20s. He came in the 20s. He was, and because he was able to marry, not until after World War II, but he was able to have a family, and because he had a family, he wasn't with some of the people he knew at the I Hotel or at the SROs, right? But he came in that group, 1928, and you know, didn't go to the fields. He stayed in the kitchens in San Francisco. But were it not for, you know, meeting my mother after the war, he probably would have been right there. You know, although he preferred Japantown, he preferred, you know, the Fillmore, and there was
it was more the Fillmore than it was Japantown at that time.
Well, yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, the Japanese were there, but they didn't have the institutionalized Japantown, but yeah,
they didn't have the what do you call it, the redeveloped Japantown.
Right, yeah. And so, yeah, it was just the Fillmore, right? It's just, you know, the Asians with the blacks. And so he lived mostly on...
I mean, the Robles family, right?
Yeah.
That's where they're from.
Right. So they lived... Yeah. My dad lived on Sutter and on Post and, you know, all those places around there. But he'd go down to the Kearney Street. You know, that was their social center, right? They'd take...
Sure.
And then now they're going to 6th Street, then South the Market. But so I know those men. I mean, I see those men, and I could see my dad because you know, in some ways, the family kind of saved him, or because he was able to have a family, it saved him from that plight. But he was doing the same things, working. And it would have been better if he worked for a white family in Pacific Heights as a houseboy. I don't know. You know, it's so.
No, I don't.
Yeah. So this is an important anniversary because it's just that reminder about how.
Yeah, I mean, I feel gratified that there are still quite a few people who remember, and you know, and the fact that we have that center is. I mean, little, you know, 8-year-old kids got to start somewhere. So, since, you know, we don't have the real places for them to see anymore, like Tino's Barbershop, you know, all we have are these archival things.
And that's Curtis Choy, director of the documentary The Fall of the I Hotel. He screened it on August 4th on the 40th anniversary of The Fall of the I Hotel. It took 6 years to make the film. Still plays well as a documentary of the event. And you can check out the website at aldef.org/blog. And there's a link to get to a place where if you're interested in ordering The Fall of the I Hotel. And if you're listening in the San Francisco Bay Area, do try to make the screening. It's August 4th, Friday at Manilatown Center at the International Hotel, 868 Kearney Street in the city. And that's our program. We're on iTunes. Please subscribe, rate, and review. Tell your friends about the show. Share a link. You can contact me on Twitter at Emil Amok, or that's at EMILAMOK, at Emil Amok, or go to the Aldef blog at www.aaldef.org/blog. Give us your feedback on www.amok.com and leave a message on SpeakPipe. You don't even need a phone. It's there on the website. Just follow the prompts and speak your message. And if you're so moved, check out the blog and support the program. Go to the aldef.org/blog. Click on the donate button. You know, Aldef is a 501c3 and your help is fully tax deductible. Just let them know you like the podcast and the blog. And that's it. We talked about the iHotel. We remember the iHotel 40 years, hard to believe, 40 years after the eviction. That I remember I was on the East Coast. I remember seeing it on the news thinking, oh my goodness, what are they doing? Seeing the police on horseback. But it's a part of our Asian American history. So thanks again for listening to Emil Amok's Takeout. I'm Emil Guillermo.